Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Today is World Homeless Day, where organisations around the globe shed light on the issue. Right now, more than 2% of New Zealanders are without a home. Stats NZ figures show more than 112,000 people are now severely housing deprived across the country. In Auckland, there's been a 53% increase in rough sleeping since late last year. Manaaki Rangitahi aims to end youth homelessness in Aotearoa New Zealand. CEO Bianca Johanson is with us today on The Front Page to discuss how, as a country, we can make this happen. So, Bianca, how bad is homelessness among our young people?
Well, we don't have the data and the stats, so we're always asking the government to help us fund and research that. So we don't know the massive, size of the problem. We do know that special needs grants back in 23, early 24, were around over 5,000 per year. So that's for emergency housing back when there was emergency housing available. I think it's now down to the sort of the hundreds. We do know that Dr. Terry Ann Clark, who did the Youth 2000 research, she estimated that there was over 100,000 rangatahi in Aotearoa that are facing housing insecurity and homelessness. So it's a pretty big stat because internationally, youth homelessness is often hidden because of the couch surfing and staying at other people's places and going from place to place, looking for somewhere stable to live.
And that's what people don't realise, hey, homelessness isn't just your rough sleepers out in the street that you might be, who are visible to us. What else does it include?
Oh, look, there's a growing older women's homelessness in this country and internationally, as of course with the recession and the economic issues that everybody's facing, increasing house prices, etc., and also our kaumātua kuia, our elderly people. But for rangatahi, the research is really clear. If we start in preventing and ending youth homelessness, we'll make a massive difference in the outcomes and the statistics for those that are older. So the older streeties, because I used to work for LifeWise Trust in the central city in Tāmaki there, and all of them that I've spoken to that are around sort of 40 plus, housing insecurity and homelessness started when they were young people and wards of the state and coming out of care and situations like that, whānau breakdowns, abusive whānau. For many of them, it started when they were young.
We've had Marama Davidson on, the Greens co-leader. We've spoken to her before about the fact that when you leave oranga tamariki or state care, the government isn't actually legally required to make sure that you have a safe accommodation, a safe home to go into.
You would think that the least we can do for these children who have been in the system and are coming out of care, young children, that the least we can do is provide them with that really basic support for the rest of their lives to be able to flourish. What we are seeing, however, and hearing right now is that young people, even with advocates and support workers, are being told at every stop, sorry, we cannot help you.
I suppose this is something that's not news to you.
Yes, not news to me. Around 800 to 1,000 young people every year are transitioning out of oranga tamariki care, and a lot of them run away before they're 16, actually. So we've got a lot of young people. I mean, I could take you around the Auckland CBD right now, and we'll have children and young people that are hiding out underage, perhaps looking a bit older, but are actually younger and do have guardianship and custody orders from oranga tamariki that are sleeping rough right now, and oranga tamariki have no idea where their young people are. I mean, if you have children, I have children, my children are older, but when they were children, when they were 12 and 15, I knew where they were. The state does not know where all of their people that they have custody and care for actually are. So, yeah, we've got 800 to 1,000 young people that are exiting care every year, and they're exiting into nothing. They're often disconnected from whānau because there hasn't been the relationship kept with whānau. So the trajectory of their lives and the outcomes that will be their future in terms of homelessness and housing is pretty dire, because they don't have whānau and those natural community supports to go to. So homelessness can be an inevitability for a vast majority, especially our rangatahi Māori, who are overrepresented in the care statistics. So it's really grim with Oranga Tamariki. I know that they do have youth transitions housing, but there's not enough. There's not enough in the country for the need that's there. That's what we've seen.
When it comes to, you said that if you take me down to Auckland CBD right now, you'd be able to show me some young people living rough.
Yes.
What are some of the stories that you've heard from the ground?
From the ground is that young people don't have any front-facing information. So if you're a young person in Aotearoa tonight, there is nowhere for you to go, and you're homeless. There's nowhere. There's no housing. There never has been. And
no shelters?
Not for young people. So you can't actually have a tenancy agreement if you're 18 and under. Many of our rangatahi that come into supported youth housing and youth housing specific are usually under 20. You know, that's the vast majority that are looking for support. So young people are saying, look, there's no front-facing information. I can't find where to go. Many of them, if they go into MSD, are not even able to make it to the receptionist desk to be able to get the support that they need. And if they do make it past the receptionist, which is usually quite a bias and can be a very aggressive and oppressive process for them to actually get to see somebody about their needs. But if you're a young person, say you're in Auckland, you're in Queen Street, and there's MSD there on Queen Street, for you to be able to make it into Queen Street, MSD, make it to the receptionist desk, they will ask you to go to a youth payment provider. Those are the people that usually pick up young people who are experiencing their first bout of homelessness or housing insecurity, and they need somewhere to go tonight. So the nearest youth payment provider to Queen Street is in Epsom.
Wow.
So they're expected, without any income, without usually a AT hop card or anything like that, having to go all the way to Epsom, to the nearest youth payment provider to get that kind of support. So there's a lot of gaps in the system that rangatahi can fall down, and this is what we are very, very concerned about as Manaaki Rangitahi, that too many of our young people fall down the gaps, and while they're falling down the gaps, they get into really unsafe situations because they are the most vulnerable out there in that kind of street community and culture by virtue of their age.
And even building up the courage to take yourself to MSD in the first place, and never mind actually getting past the receptionist and things like that. I mean, it must be really difficult for these rangatahi. Do they stick together mostly, or and build a community? What's their community like?
Are so varied in terms of, you know, how they do things. We often don't get a lot of our young men coming into youth housing because they tend to be quite sort of independent. So you've got all sorts of stories and experiences happening for people. We've got our LGBTQI plus rangatahi that are getting kicked out of home, usually because they have been coming out or because of their sexuality. So that particular cohort find it really difficult because there isn't something specific for our rainbow youth to go to in terms of safe housing, especially if you're transgender, etc. Then we've got our oranga tamariki rangatahi that are transitioning out of care. And then you've got rangatahi who have had some care experience in their lives, like their lives have been touched by the state in terms of investigations or things like that. And they have grown older, the house is overcrowded, they're perhaps encouraged to move on, or they're leaving unsafe whānau situations where, there's abuse or addiction issues and they just can't tolerate living in that situation anymore.
I was not prepared well to leave care. If I was prepared well to leave care, I would have been supported to find alternative accommodation. I would have been provided with financial advisors to be able to make better financial decisions. They would have supported me to get into the workforce. In saying that, though, I am in the workforce, but also that took a lot of my own work to be able to be better equipped to help our most vulnerable tamariki, rangitahi and whānau involved with oranga tamariki.
At the moment, does the government legally have to make sure that every young person has a place to live?
No, there's no youth strategy. The government we don't even in Aotearoa have an age that we say are youth. There's no real definition. 16 to 24, you are considered a young person. But that's what we've been advocating and hustling for as a collective. We're the only youth housing and homeless collective in Aotearoa, and we use that power of collective impact to advocate for change. We have sat with ministers and said, we need a youth strategy specific for rangatahi, because the research internationally is very clear. We need to start with rangatahi. If we were going to have any funds available, which, by the way, this government has actually taken away $20 million of the youth housing funding in Aotearoa, put it towards rangatahi, because there is the prevention. There you can make a massive difference. That's what we're calling on this government and any other government that comes in the future and previous to do.
Because how young are these kids who are living rough?
So we have a provider, the Pride Project, that are out in Manurewa. They are picking up young people from the bus stops and other places that are not wanting to go home, and they're 8 or 9 years old. It can vary. There's a whole massive continuum from actual children to young people. But as I said, most young people are presenting anywhere from around 13 years old up to 20 years old. Of course, they can't come into youth housing. It's only for 16 to 20, but each youth housing provider has their own kind of criteria. And youth housing is the place that we advocate for young people to come into, and supported youth housing, not adult transitional housing. So a 16-year-old being at adult transitional housing, we've got all sorts of ages, typically mainly men and others, is not a safe space for rangatahi to be.
So let me get this straight. There's no place, if you were to pick up a 13-year-old in the middle of Auckland who has been sleeping rough, where would you take them? There's nowhere to take them specifically.
No, that's the role of oranga tamariki.
So there's no youth housing situation?
No.
You must be so frustrated.
It is really frustrated because we don't have either a street outreach really that's looking for these, youth specific. And that's one of the things that we're working with HUD. HUD, of course, are responsible for homelessness and, those that are sleeping rough in Aotearoa. So we have been talking to them about having a youth street outreach. Earlier this year, we went and presented at the first Preventing Youth Homelessness conference ever in the world. We were the only New Zealand delegates that went and, presented there, and everywhere has youth street outreach, emergency youth facilities, they're tackling and actually acknowledge that there's a problem with youth homelessness. We have really yet to have this government or subsequent governments actually acknowledge we have a youth housing problem.
Or even just a conversation about it.
Kia Kia ora, that's right. We did have a homelessness minister that with this government that has been taken away, and that just falls under the portfolio of Tama Pōtaka. When we had Marama Davidson in that role, we made great advances, actually, and that's where we were able to have more youth housing than that's ever been seen in Aotearoa, but we still have massive parts of the country that have no youth housing available. So from West Auckland right up to the top of the north, there is nothing for rangatahi, nothing suitable, nothing specific. We've got Napier that had massive floods, and that really impacted on the housing situation there. They've got no youth housing. We've got whānau living in tents with children with respiratory issues. We get all sorts of problems and stories and crisis coming through here. I think what's important to remember is that Leilani Whaha, who is the UN Housing Rapporteur, came here in 2020, I think it was 2020 or 21, and she announced that New Zealand is having not a housing crisis, but a human rights crisis. So you can't advance. I mean, it's very rich for the government to be calling on young people must work, work, work. And it's very hard to go to work when you don't have safe, warm, dry, secure housing to have a good night's sleep in and to advance yourself.
If you were to change something tomorrow, no questions asked, there's a money tree out the back, what would you do?
Money tree out the back. Actually, I had one of the ministers say to me, look, if I gave you $30 million, what would you do? It's not just about increasing the youth housing supply, because we could build 5,000 more houses tomorrow, and that's not going to, do everything. Yes, the housing supply is really important, but we need to have a strategy as a country. We need to look at putting funding into prevention. We need to have research and data. There's a whole lot of things that we could do in terms of healing for our young people. I mean, I would want to actually redevelop the whole system and look at all the drivers of young people into homelessness and how we can actually prevent and stop that, plug up the gaps. I mean, I talked in a previous interview that we actually need to devolve a lot of our state kind of systems that look after young people into the community, into Māori housing, Pacific housing providers, and make it so that it's easy to access support. So I think, yes, we need to put some money towards it, but we all need to come together, all of the ministries, all of the ministers, and have an across-party support about how we're actually going to do something effective about this issue.
And from the kids' point of view as well, ask them.
Exactly. Our rangatahi and the rangatahi that I've spoken to are very political and very politically astute, and they have solutions. They have spoken to politicians, some of them, and shared their story. And, they want to prevent other young people going onto the streets and experiencing what they have had to experience. I mean, one night of rough sleeping, I don't know if you've ever had to, you've been locked out of your house or ever had to sleep a little bit rough or sleep in your car. It's a terrible, terrible night, one that most people will never forget. And what we say is one night too many of having to sleep rough.
Thanks for joining us, Bianca.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Kia ora.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in on Monday for another look behind the headlines.